Hey, Jay Carper again, and I'm still in Joshua 10. Today I'd like to talk about Joshua's long day. Let me read to you from Joshua chapter 10, verses 12 through 14. Then Joshua spoke to Yahweh in the day when Yahweh delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel, and he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ayalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the people had revenge upon their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Yashar? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven, and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. And there has been no day like that before it or after it, that Yahweh heeded the voice of a man, for Yahweh fought for Israel. Now, many of you have probably heard that there was an incident at NASA some years ago, and depending on the report, it may be, in recent years or way back in the 60s, when they ran a computer simulation about the movements of stars and planets in the sun backwards in time for whatever reason. And the computer returned an error and said that there was a missing day somewhere, way back BC. The reports vary from 700 to 1500 BC. And this particular incident should be somewhere between 1200 and 1400 BC. Now, the first problem with this report is that it doesn't originate with NASA or computers or the 1960s. It goes all the way back at least to 1890, when a man named Charles Totten, professor of military science at Yale University, not an astronomer, not a physicist, not a mathematician, reported that some other astronomer had done this same calculation and found a missing day in the stars. The fact that the details of the stories and who did the calculations changes over time should immediately give you pause. This sounds like just like every other urban legend that we've heard. All the Bigfoot stories, the Mothman, the details change and the locations change, the names change. Doesn't sound true. The biggest problem is that this calculation isn't even possible. It's a complete fantasy. Nothing like this could ever happen, let alone did happen. Now, you can calculate backwards in time based on stars and planets. You can extrapolate backwards using a computer model, saying here's where we know everything is today. Here's how fast everything is moving in particular directions. Now wind the clock backwards and see where everything would be 100 years ago, 10,000 years ago, a million years ago, whatever. We can do that just fine. Now, in order to find a discrepancy in the locations of stars or planets, we would need to have an exact picture of where all of the stars and the planets and the sun and moon were at some specific time in the past. In this case, it would have to be before the time of Joshua's long day. And then you would have to know, you'd probably have to know exactly how many minutes, or how many hours at least, have transpired since that point to today. Now, the only measurement of time they had back then was the position of the sun or the moon, the phases of things, the movement of stars. In a sundial can tell you the passage of time throughout a day, but it really only measures the exact position of the sun at any given time in relation to the sundial itself. It can't tell you how many hours have passed since a past event. It can't keep track of time. It's not a stopwatch. It's just a shadow on a rock or a piece of metal. So there were no real clocks. It's not even possible to keep track of time over thousands of years without electronics and things of that nature. So without an exact description of the location of all of the bodies of the solar system and the constellations at some point before Joshua, in order to compare to where they are now, it is absolutely impossible for anybody to calculate a missing day. And such an exact record doesn't exist nowhere. So this whole thing is a myth designed to take advantage of gullible people who don't understand physics and astronomy. So when you hear things on the internet, or not on the internet, because this started at least as far back as 1890, don't just believe every wild story you hear, even if it sounds like something that supports your most cherished beliefs. We know that there was a missing day because the book of Joshua tells us. Not really a missing day, just the sun and the moon stood still. But that doesn't mean that any scientist or mathematician will ever be able to prove that. The only way to prove it is to get a time machine and go back and visit for yourself and take some video footage or something, but then even that could be doctored. Don't believe everything that people tells you, especially if what they're telling you is what you want to believe. Make sure that it makes sense. Verify that it's even possible, because otherwise you're just going to look like a fool. This is Jake Harper from American Torah. Be blessed, and don't be fooled.